I apologize for my lateness here. I got lost. What is this? Some kind of army barracks or something? I was thinking Hoagland was that one over there, and I was waiting, looking around, and it was like the door was locked. And I don't need this cord. Okay, so and then I couldn't believe it. I was looking to see where the room was, and so I look and I go, okay, well let me see what this room is like, and it was like there wasn't very many seats, but it looks like we're okay, right? So I was thinking we were going to be in big trouble. Okay, Patrick Farrell, professor of linguistics. This is syntactic theory. We're doing this as a combined undergraduate and graduate course. This is not something to freak out about. That we're doing that because it's the same subject matter and it's more efficient that way. The main difference is that the ones that are enrolled in Linguistics 231 will have a term paper, and those enrolled in Ling 131 will have the regular kind of stuff. I'm not exactly sure. I'm kind of working on the syllabus. I'm trying out a new idea. Let me know what you think about this. Instead of having you have to have a final, right? I mean, I don't know, some kind of rule. But they don't say what the final has to be, right? So it could be like almost anything. You could say, well, okay, do a take-home final and it's only worth 5 points. And so then, but I'm not really thinking of doing that. But I'm thinking of doing something I haven't done before, which is to have, instead of a midterm exam, so there'll be regular assignments. This is for Ling 131. There will be regular homework assignments, and that's going to make up maybe a third of the grade. And then instead of a midterm exam, we'll have a project where you do a group project, and it's a collaborative thing, and you do something like what I'm thinking is like build a wiki about some topic. So I'll choose some topics. You guys work in groups. You do it as a group. And then does that sound like a good idea or not? Anybody say no? I want a midterm exam instead. No. Do we have to? Is there some reason why we always have midterm exams? Do we always? We don't always, do we? No. Okay. All right. So I'm working on that. That's one of the ideas. But there will be regular homework assignments of some kind, and those that are enrolled, as I said, in 231 will have a term paper. That's the main difference, and they won't have. There's no final exam. Kind of silly. Okay. So what else? All of the materials are on SmartSite. You log in if you're enrolled in the class, then you should be able to do that. It does look like it's pretty tight in here. I've asked that another room be that we get another room, but you never know with that. The other thing that's possible is that I'm taping the lecture together with the slides, so the slides and the audio will be synced, and it'll be a pretty nice podcast. You don't need to come to class. You can just go online and get the same stuff. But that isn't for everyone. But there might be enough people that would prefer to do that, so that it works out, right? How many think they would prefer to just stay at home in bed and watch the? You could fast forward it, right? You get rid of all the crap, right? Who thinks right now that would be an okay thing to do? Okay, so maybe that'll work out. All right. So if we're doing syntax, what we're looking at is what? Everything besides morphology. No. Morphology too, right? Morphology is important. You can't really do syntax without doing morphology. We're looking at the structure of sentences. And the structure of sentences, we're not looking at the sound structure, right? That's a minor detail. We're looking at pretty much everything else. And focusing in particular on the structure of sentences, the words that go up to make a sentence, what is a possible sentence, what isn't, what order the things have to go in, what categories they belong to. I just made up some crazy sentences here. Just it's kind of arbitrary, not exactly arbitrary. But what I want you to do is so what we do, the syntactician what the classic syntactician, what he or she does is to say, well, how does this all work? And how are we going to figure out how it all works? What we're going to do is we're going to construct sentences and see what appears to be the rules. And we'll look at the words and think of them in terms of what categories they belong to. So some things are nouns, some things are verbs, some things we know that they're verbs. How do we know? How would you know in first sentence A, how do you know that there's a verb there? And what is it? What's the verb? Kissed. Is there any morphological evidence for that being a verb? The ed on the end. The ed doesn't go on nothing but verbs, right? So there's stuff like that we notice. Okay, everybody knows that. Of course, there's a verb. And then there are nouns and other kinds of things, and we got categories for them all. And then we figure out, well, what is the system whereby we string them together? We can't just string them together randomly, right? So go A, B, C, D, and say, okay, you just tell me, you say, that's okay, not okay. Use whatever system that you want. A, B, C, D, good, not good. Sentence A? Perfect, right? I mean, it's stupid, right? But still, I mean, it's very unlikely to occur, but that doesn't make it, bad, right? Sentence B. How many say that sentence B is okay? You say sentence B? Are you looking at that? Didn't kissed? Those boys didn't kissed? No. What? Okay, sentence B? Not good, right? Why not? Who can tell me why that's no good?
You cannot have D in it.
You cannot have the ed ending on kiss, right? Why not? What's the rule that disallows that? Is that okay? So there's an auxiliary in there. So does everyone know what auxiliary verb is? The auxiliary verb is what? Didn't, right? It's a notice that we have, in order to even understand this, we have to be able to see the morphology here, right? And so did has an unt on it, an unt ending on it that makes it a negated verb. But we know it's a verb of some kind. What's the meaning of the verb here in the case of didn't? What's the meaning of kissed? Somebody give me a paraphrase of what kissed would mean, or kiss. What does kiss mean? To touch your lips to something, right? So it has to, so there's some kind of action there that involves someone doing something critically with their lips, right? So kiss has that concept involved in it. The kind of action that you do with lips, but not sucking on a straw, right? So there's more to it than that, right? Although you could probably say that in certain circumstances, but that's the basic action that it is. Okay, and did, the meaning is, can you do something like that with did? No, because why? Why can't you do something like that? Because did is an auxiliary that is in that sentence for one reason only. What's the reason that it's in there? Okay, for negation, because there's a rule in English that says, what's the rule in English that says when you put unt? Where do you put unt? When you want to negate a sentence. So I start out with those boys kissed a frog on the lips. The negation of that would be, you need to have an auxiliary verb, right? But you started out with a sentence, let's say, here's the sentence, those boys kissed a frog on the lips. How do I negate that sentence? I don't have an auxiliary. I only have kiss. So what do? I have to stick in an auxiliary. This is all random English crap, right? Stick in an auxiliary. I don't have one. I stick in do. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything. It's not adding anything to the meaning here, right? Okay, and so there are rules that say what we can do and what we can't do, right? And so what the syntactician is doing is trying to figure out what those rules are, make them explicit in such a way as to capture the knowledge that underlies our intuitions about what are good sentences and what aren't, right? So the classic syntactician would sit around in, sometimes they'd get together in groups, right? Or they'd sit alone in their rooms, and they would go, well, I know English. Let me make up some sentences. Let me try something let me try something else, right? And then I go, is that good? No, that's not good. Ungrammatical sentence. So we use evidence from what are grammatical sentences, well-formed sentences with all of the syntactic structure, all the right morphology in place, the words all arranged in the correct order. And then we filter out the ungrammatical ones, and we devise rules that allow only the grammatical ones. That's the basic idea. Now, that's not the only thing that we can do, but that's the classic way of coming to syntactic analysis of a language, how a language works. So let's look, if we take the frog's eyes kissed a belief on the head. Is this good? It's grammatical. What does that mean?
The syntax is fine with semantics.
Okay, so we've got something where we have a grammatical sentence of some kind, right? But it just is stupid, right? Because it's not something that you could ever imagine happening. Because why? Because kiss means do something with your lips, right? And where you can put your lips is on, you could do it with an object, couldn't you? You could say, he kissed the bottle before. Well, it's fine, right? You could do it. It'd be kind of strange, but you know, there's all kinds of lunacy out there in the world, right? But this is just stupid because a belief is not even a physical object, right? So how could you possibly touch a belief with your lips? You might be able to, right? Because one of the things that we can do is that we can use metaphor to stretch things in certain ways, right? So we could stretch this, we could stretch the concept of kiss. Here's an example where we have a metaphor for kiss, right? Where you see there in the bottom part of this paragraph, this is a random story taken off of the internet about some lady who has the sun kiss her cheeks. Because why? Well, yeah, you could imagine that. You can feel the sun on your cheeks when you're out on a sunny day, right? And you could imagine someone kind of smiling, and that would be a good sensation. And so there it makes sense. But in what it would take for the frog's eyes kissed a belief on the head to be a nice metaphor is unclear, right? So it's just a bad metaphor. It's one that doesn't have a good match with the world. But we wouldn't consider it to be ungrammatical because we can see that the frog's brother kissed a girl on the head. That'd be fine, right? So that's the same structure that we have there, just that the words are different, right? Okay, if we go to those boys didn't kiss a frog on the lip, then I see two problems with this, potentially, right? We already talked about one of them. Didn't kissed is bad, right? What's the other one? It's kind of weird to say on the lip, right? But is it ungrammatical? Probably not, right? I mean, because it would make sense, I suppose, right? And what's weird is that we do this kind of thing, right? I mean, think about it. When you think about lips, there's a sense in which they are all one unit, right? They form one unit. And in other languages, I know that in Brazilian Portuguese, it would be fine to use just the singular to designate that entire unit. So that's a possibility. Conceptually, there's no problem there. It's just that if you're going to kiss something, you usually, and it involves lips of the other thing you're kissing, right? Or the other person you're kissing, then there's usually contact between both of the lips, and so therefore you would use plural, right? Isn't that what the situation is? But sometimes we don't do it that way. If I say, I want you to, and I'm going to tell you to have your eyes gaze into my eyes, then I can say, I want you right now to look me in the eye, right? So random thing that you can do in languages. So another kind of thing that we can do besides using our own, just our intuitions, right? So the classic syntactician is sitting around using intuitions, making up all kinds of complex sentences and saying, what if I try this? And then they get together and they have conversations about it and figure it out that way. But nowadays we can also use corpora. So we can use collections of sentences that people have actually produced to give us a sense of what's possible, what's good, and all that kind of stuff, right? Here's a large corpus that we can go to that has a very, very nice structure to it, whereby you can search for very specific things. And it's a corpus of 55 billion words or something like that. Yeah, well, what does it say? 158 billion words. So here's all of the Google books with American English that are American English books is collected into a corpus that can be searched and whereby you can do tallies by year as well and all kinds of things, right? And then we go and I set up the search in just this way and I'm asking for it to say any version of kiss. I don't care. Give me any one. Kisses, kissed, kissing. Any of those is okay, right? And then that's in the brackets, right? And then I say, I don't care, give me any pronoun. And I list them and I put either a bracket in between them or a little line there, whatever you call that thing. And then the same thing for lip. I don't care, give me either singular or plural. And then what do I find? I go and I look and I see, do I find any cases of kiss on the lip? None whatsoever, right? In this 158 billion word corpus. Does that tell me that it's not a possible thing to say? Not really, right? Because I just came up with a sentence and made it up all on my own, and you're looking at it and going, yeah, could make sense, right? So then we try something else. We go to actual Google, not Google Books, right? Because here we're going to get more than, what are you going to get in a set of American English books that are on Google Books? You're going to get things where there are no apostrophes missing. There are no superfluous apostrophes. You're not going to get lots of things that are part of the ordinary spoken language, right? Because why? Because this is all edited stuff, right? There are people that are professionals, there are professional editors sitting in there going, okay, this is okay, that's not okay, and so forth, right? But in this case, it's just, I think, the complete oddness of the concept that excludes it. If we go to regular Google, then we find about, what does it say, 7 million something hits for kissed him on the lips. I'm just using him here. I don't have to do all the pronouns on regular Google because the corpus is humongous, right? And the way you can't search it like you can with Google Books. But the interesting thing, but then we go, oh, wait a minute, kissed him on the lip. There actually is some results, right? Not a whole lot. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, yeah, sometimes you can get 21 results for something that's ungrammatical, that's clearly ungrammatical because people make typos, right? And all kinds of things. Or you can get people who are learning English and don't know it very well and so forth, right? So it would be, I wonder if this might actually be a Brazilian that actually wrote this up, but you can find sort of doesn't look like a Brazilian name. And it says into his eyes, right? Whereas in Brazilian, you would just say I in this case. But kissed him on the lip, and then you read the whole thing, and you say, well, yeah, you could imagine a scenario where someone actually just says, okay, that one lip, the bottom lip, I'm going to kiss on that, and I'm going to nibble, what does it say, nibbling? Okay, good. But here we have, so there's a context in which that's okay. Given the right context, then this is okay, and we have to be aware of that, right? If we're searching the entire, if we're just searching, across Google, I'm looking for that specific phrase, right? I put it in quotes, but then we get this. But then I did a calculation because I do this for lawyers. They hire me to do to determine whether this word is common or this phrase is common, or this was for a case in which I was trying to figure out whether two authors, one of them being one that was posting slanderous blogs that were ruining someone's life, and so there was a lawsuit and so forth, and I had to figure out whether they were whether the author of the authenticated documents and the one doing the slandering were the same. And I basically gave them the equivalent of DNA evidence based on doing searches of Google Books and Google, other kinds of corpora, various kinds of corpora. But what I discovered, so then I go on to this place, there's a website that measures the web and trying to figure out how fast it grows. And how do you think they do that? They do it by searching a set of what we know to be very common English words. And so you get a pretty rough idea how many web pages with English on them there are by just searching for the, right? But if you do that with a set of them, like the, into, for, those kinds of things, those very, very common words, then you can get a better sense of it and so forth. So there's people that tell you how many web pages there are, but how many words are there? So I did a calculation of it, roughly, in March of 2011, 5.5 trillion. So that's a much bigger corpus than Google Books, right? But it's an unstructured one, right? But you can still find out things about what is grammatical and what isn't, right? If you find a small number of alternatives, so you have alternative constructions, and you set it up right, and you do the search, and you know that it's a construction that's likely to occur, but there are two different versions of it, and one of them only comes up a few times, and you go look at them, and you say, well, but some of these are not even, they're English learners or whatever, then that gives you evidence, right? But notice that it's complicated evidence. Knowing whether something is well-formed or not isn't altogether straightforward. And then we know that this is bad because we know that this part of the grammar of English is all worked out. We have different forms of verbs. This is where we have to know the morphology. In some cases, the form of the verbs for the past tense and the past participle are the same. So English is hard, right? It's not like it's really simple. We don't always mark the past participle form. We do in certain cases, like with broken and stolen and given. Did I do that twice? Give? Well, whatever, right? People make mistakes, right? Kiss, kissed, kissed, and so forth. But we have different forms, and then we have rules, right? And one of the rules is that the past tense form of a verb, and auxiliaries can be in the past tense form, only can ever show up on the first auxiliary verb in a sentence if there is an auxiliary, right? If there is no auxiliary, then it shows up where? On the main verb. So there's a complicated rule for where you allow past tense to show itself. It's not always on the verb. Sometimes it's on the auxiliary. And then we have a rule about the form of the verb that follows of auxiliaries. So depending on what the auxiliary is, if we use the auxiliary have, then like he has go to the store, we use what form of go? Gone, which is the past participle form. And so that will be true across. You take the ones that have the special forms for the past participle, and that will be true across the board. He has broken all of the dishes. He has given all of his money to the bank, and so forth, right? You cannot say he has gave, he has, and so forth, right? There's a set of rules about what can follow auxiliary verbs, right? And with the auxiliary verb do, the verb that follows has to be in its bare form, sometimes called the infinitive form, whatever you want to call that. Notice that I just make up this stuff because there's really no standard terminology. Sometimes people say infinitive and they mean something different, but there is a form that absolutely has no marking on it at all. It's what you would put in the dictionary. The dictionary entry uses the bare form or the infinitive, right? So this is an ungrammatical sentence because it doesn't follow the rule for the auxiliary verb, as we already noticed, right? How about this one? Those boys ain't never kissed no frog on the lips.
No problem.
Huh?
I see no problem with it.
I don't see no problem with it, right? It's not like I ain't never said nothing like that, right? And standard English is?
I mean, like in the idea of standard English, we're like double negative.
Okay, so there's a ideal English. What do we even know that there really is such a thing? And isn't that sort of a fiction of some kind? Huh? No, at some level it would be taken out by editors of books, right? Unless it were part of a dialogue where they're representing authentic speech, right? So you would find stuff like this in The Grapes of Wrath, for example, where John Steinbeck uses the authentic dialogue of people and tries to represent it in the way he writes things and so forth. So that's a common thing. But in let's say in our spoken English, would I say this if I was in court and the judge was asking me questions, right? Or the lawyers were asking me questions, they're trying to figure out if I should be on the jury or not. Well, then I probably should say that, right? And I'll get out of jury. But, I would filter that out. But if I'm talking to my neighbor who is a construction worker and he doesn't talk any other way, right? Then I'm going to fit in and say that, right? So all of us probably have, different, what would we call them? Different styles of speech, not really different dialects in some sense, right? But different registers or something like that. But in any case, you could say that that there are two different dialects of English or varieties of English, and they would have different forms, and they would have negative polarity form, and negative forms would be true of the different dialects, and then you would have different rules. In one variety of speech, the auxiliary verb is negated, if the auxiliary verb is negated, and you can see there are different ways of negating it. For some speakers, or in some registers, you would negate have, the auxiliary verb have, with haven't, right? But the other one, you can negate with ain't, right? It's a kind of simplification of things, right? I don't need to have lots of forms. Have and be, any form that they come in can be negated with ain't. So you collapse a bunch of forms and simplify things. And you have different dialects. And so this is a grammatical sentence only in one variety of English, right? So we have to be aware of that when we're doing analyses, right? That there's a difference between being something that the English teacher would say is within the scope of the grammar of English, right? The English teacher is going to have a very restricted vision of what that scope is, and so would have a different take on it. Here's a song from Short Straight.
Hey, I even knew some twins in Denver's day, but them one cold December. I ain't never seen no one like you.
See if I can do that again. Here's a song from Short Straight.
Hey, I even knew some twins in Denver's day, but them one cold December. I ain't never seen no one like you.
See if I can do that again.
Hey, I even knew some twins in Denver's day, but them one cold December. I ain't never seen no one like you.
You hear this all the time, right? This kind of stuff, right? So it is part of a certain dialect, a regional dialect, that also interacts with class, right? Okay, how about these sentences? Are they okay? Not okay? Who were you talking to? Is that okay? Is anybody frowning or saying, I don't know, I'm not sure? That's not what you would say? What would you say? Which one of those would you pick? Number 2, to whom were you talking? Okay. So you got good grades in English, I'll bet. But you know, you have to kind of look at it and see. How about with sentence D? Who do you expect to win the election? Is that okay? How many you would say? I bet you would say E. Whom do you expect to win the election? And what about F? How many people would say F is okay? You think it's okay, right? Okay. So then we look at this and let's take a look at what the deal is, right? There are different forms of certain kinds of words. And if you go back to Old English, there were different forms of the. So the main way that you knew what was something, whether something was subject or object or something else, right, was the form, in general, was the form of the that you happened to use. And there were several of them. I don't know what they all are, but there was an objective form, phona, something like that, right? And then there was, I don't know how it was, I guess it was pronounced the, or the, I don't know, something like that in Old English. And then you had that for a whole set of different things. But fairly early on, that whole, all of those different forms of the get completely leveled, get reduced to just one. So we just, and it's the nominative form. It was actually, there's nominative, I don't know all the things that there are, nominative, singular, plural, masculine, feminine, I don't know where they drew the line. I never can remember this stuff because we don't have any, we have no, just knowing English will give you nothing about that at all. You'd have to actually go and study Old English as if you were studying Latin or German. But by 1200 or so, this is gone. The whole set of those things has disappeared by the language, so very early on. Some people say under the influence of the Viking invaders that came and took over parts of England, and then the Anglo-Saxons held off and didn't get all killed off, and then they eventually got all together and intermarried, and they were all speaking. There was a mingling of Old Norse and Old English, Anglo-Saxon, right, or Old English dialects and so forth. And since Old Norse didn't do it the same way, they just said, let's drop it. We don't really even need this crap, right? Because you don't, right? So that's gone by 1200. This we still recognize, right? Thou and thee. I don't even know. Do we even know how to use them, though? Thy mother. That's fine, right? That means your mother. Thou shalt not. We know that if you did any religion in the Christian religion, you probably heard this stuff, right? Thou shalt not kill. Isn't that like one of the commandments or something? So that means thou must be the nominative form. I should, I don't know, I should speak to thee? Unto thee? Okay. So that's gone by, except in prayers, like, or whatever, by 1850 or so. And now we've got whom on the same track, right? On the way to being gone. And I would say basically in spoken American English, already virtually gone. But we are told in school perhaps that you're supposed to use whom under certain circumstances, right? But the fact of the matter is that those of us who may, I don't even try, right? But those of us who do try to use it usually kind of, I was going to say fuck up. I can say that, right? Fuck up. Okay, yeah.
It seems less than whom it's just.
It's very weird for it to be in the subject slot.
It seems because
That's not the subject slot, though.
I mean, in the
Initial position. Yeah, but I mean, if you go and you look and you see, well, you could put it in. Can't you put it in relative clauses and stuff where it's not in the initial position, and you still get the same set of facts, basically. Where people sometimes just throw it in randomly, and nobody knows really how it all works. In fact, you can make it even more complicated by doing that. This is with questions, which makes it. In some ways, that actually makes it possible in some cases, right? But in any case, yeah, there's a grammar of this stuff that we have to keep in mind. And so the nominative form of pronouns and determiners in Old English, right, were used for the subject of a clause when it has, and so it's complicated. It's not just the subject of a clause. It's the subject of a clause in which there is a verb or auxiliary that's in a tensed form, a present or past tense form. So that makes it hard, right? Because if you go around and say, well, use these sentences where you have infinitival clauses and you ask people what's the subject, they're just going, I don't know. You know, they're thinking subject's the first thing, right? And so it gets complicated. But basically, if we want to put whom here, then we have to answer the question, right? I think he actually got the most votes, would be the answer to the question, right? And there we see that you could not put him, right? I think him actually got the most votes. Well, maybe in some versions of English, but certainly not in most, probably not in any variety of American English. Although you never know, there are lots of varieties. So that's not, that means that what we expect to be here is the nominative form. Why is it the nominative form that we expect here? Because here we're asking a question about,
Because it's the subject of the verb.
It's the subject of the verb got. So when you ask a question, what you do is you take the interrogative pronoun and move it to the front, leaving behind no evidence of where it was, right? No overt evidence, no marker of that. And so you've got what we call a gap. So there are gaps when you form questions. The interrogative phrase or pronoun goes to the front. And so then here you've got to figure out where that came from, and that's something we have to do as we process it, right? So at some level we're making the calculation that this whom is the subject of got. And then we have to actually get that got is in what form? Yeah. Today I'm going to get something from the store. Yesterday I got something from the store. So if it were just get there, then we'd be even really up a creek, right? I think I'm gonna get something from the store, right? Where get, that's the same form as the bare form, right? So you don't really even get any evidence from the verb, but here you do, right? There's a tense verb, and you should get in this question. You should get whom in archaic English at least, right? In Old English, Middle English, Shakespeare, you should get whom. But let's check with Google, because Google knows more than Ramirez. Whom do you think is the, how many do I get? 2,000, what did it say? 2.5 million, right? That's not random, right? That's not as many as you'll get if you do the other one, right? Who do you think is you get 11 million, right? But it isn't that much more, right? And these are estimates, of course, right? Google isn't really going out and finding all of those, or it's not retrieving all of those pages for you to inspect, but it's making a calculation based on its own grammar. Google has a grammar of the language, and it does it based on co-occurrence of forms with other forms. It reconstructs the grammar of the language in some sense, and it can give you a fairly reliable estimate of the robustness of one form versus the other. So what we want to say is that whom is sort of okay in ordinary contemporary English here, right? Why would it be even sort of okay if the old grammar of English wouldn't have allowed it?
Because we don't really care.
Because we don't use it enough to even know what the rules are, right? For us to be able to figure out the rules for where you use who versus whom, you'd have to have like tons of evidence, and what we get, in fact, is conflicting evidence, right? Yeah.
The choice of who versus whom in that case, a matter of grammatical facts, but stylistic.
Right.
Whom is not the objective.
There you go. It's not really the objective form, although that's what the English teachers will tell you, right? It's the form that you use to sound highfalutin. Right? So if I go into the, and we do this all over the place with lots of things about the grammar of the language. Go into the courtroom and we're saying, well, I'm not really sure. I got to be, super. My language has to be super good, and then I start, putting in things that I think must be right, even though they aren't. Yeah.
People a lot of times sort of, overcorrect, like they're so conscious of, being
Right.
incorrectly.
Right.
They'll use whom because they just assume the more correct form, or the more precise form. In the same way that people will always assume it's wrong to say, like, people have an aversion to saying me, to store with my.
Right. All over the place. Right.
Yeah.
I play tennis with these guys, and this one guy's just so confused, and he's going, well, who should you play with now? We're changing partners, and he says something like, well, you should play with he and I, or and just makes up crap. He doesn't ever know what exactly to say, and it doesn't matter how many times I explain to him, the stuff about hypercorrection, that people, and that maybe, and some, or no, it's the one that he really gets confused about is it was he that did that, right, rather than it was him, right, where normally we'd say it was him, right. I mean, could you imagine, you go. And you knock on the door, say on your sister's bedroom door, and she says, well, who is it? Oh, it's I. It's I? What world would that be, right? But, people, there's all this stuff, there's all these notions out there about what's correct and what isn't correct. And so people get confused. They hear all kinds of things. They hear teachers telling them they should do what isn't normal, right? But, we can figure out a lot of this stuff by looking at what people actually do and what the frequency of these things are. Whom do you expect to win the election? Is that okay? I expect him to win the election, not he, right? So here we have the case where whom is functioning as the subject of expect. Or no, the subject of win, right? Because I expect him to win the election, right? But win is in what form? It's in the bare form. And we know it's in the bare form. We can always test for this by whether or not we just put the verb be in there. I want him to be elected, right? Be is a verb that has all kinds of different forms. And where the bare form is demanded, you get just be. That's why it's the dictionary entry and so forth, right? Okay, so we've got whom should be okay in archaic English. That would have been the case at some point in English, and that's what the teachers are going to be trying to teach you, even though they wouldn't actually say it themselves, right? And then we go and we look, well, we have those choices, we Google it, what do we get? Who do you expect to? 22,400,000. Whom do you expect to? About 2 million, right? A lot less, right? So it has nothing to do at all with the structure of this, really, in most cases, right? It's which form you use is based on how much you want to do hypercorrection, right? 2 million here. So who is preferred in ordinary contemporary English no matter what? That's what I said earlier. Who is virtually gone. In ordinary spoken English, who is the form that is used. The who-whom distinction has been wiped out, more or less. If you go and you do some searches for this kind of stuff on the internet, what comes up first is like 100 pages, top hits on Google, 100 pages about where do I use who and when do I use who and when do I use whom. Because why? Because everybody's freaking confused, right? They don't know. And they hear people using whom, well, better for that sounds highfalutin. 4,520,000 here. This is the default. Whom were you talking to? 1,600,000. That's quite a few, right? To whom were you talking? 1,100,000 hits. What do you think about the last one? I already put some grammaticality judgments here. I'm saying that in this situation, who is preferred to whom in sentence A? in sentence B, whom is much preferred to who. Why is that? So it isn't the case that it's, Dan, going back to what you were saying, right? I don't think it's just the case that it's about highfalutenness, right? Exactly, right? Because there's something structural about this that has us, it does sort of end up being highfalutenness at some level, if that's a word. That's a word I just made up, right? And we get 36 hits for this. Why? Why?
The idea of like not in position, whatever, you know, well, it doesn't really matter is sort of the persistent form, and so is also so the idea of like mixing
Right.
those two.
Yeah, you don't want to mix those two, right? You don't want to mix the common form of who with the highfalutin form of the preposition being fronted, right? So it's the normal way to say this is leave that frickin' preposition behind, right? That's what you would almost always do in spoken English. And so in sentence B, you've created a structural situation in which the preposition is brought to the front. You would only do that in the case of being highfalutin, and you know that whom is more highfalutin than who, right? But it's that's part of the grammar at some level, right? Our grammar of the language includes all that knowledge. The knowledge of the structure of the sentence, when a preposition has been fronted, when it hasn't, what the expected forms, the normal forms are, and what's different. Okay, so we have to be aware of what we're looking at. We're looking at a very complex animal when we're looking at a language. We're looking at something that has a whole bunch of different varieties. And it's even more complicated now, not just because we have highfalutin versus non-highfalutin. We have lower socioeconomic class versus higher socioeconomic class. We have Southern English versus California English, and all of that to bear in mind. But we also have a situation now where there are speakers of Englishes. Now, the way that people talk about this is that there are Englishes all over the world. Because why? There's Indian English. There's East African English, West African English. And these are probably thought of by many people as being, what would we say? People are speaking with a foreign accent when they speak. When you get this people on AT&T and they're on the phone with you, right, and you're talking to someone and they're probably from India if they're on with AT&T, right, and you're going, I can't understand this person, right, and you think, well, they don't speak English right, or whatever, right? Is that what we think? A lot of people think that, right? But if you go and you look at the actual situation, English was brought to the Indian subcontinent, that part of the Asian subcontinent that is India, about the same time as English was brought to America. And Indian English developed as an official language there. And it's been there as an official language for a long time. And it's a language of schooling. But it's a different variety of English. It's an English that belongs to that area of the world. And so we have then a monster of different Englishes, right? So we have to be aware of that, right? The question of what's grammatical and what is a sentence structure that is possible or not is always relative to the kind of English that you're talking about, the dialect or whatever, right? Okay, so syntax then is concerned with figuring out the rules and conventions that make it possible for us, bearing in mind all of those different little conventions, the ones that we need for every different variety of English, and bearing in mind all of the different varieties that we have. The basic job of syntax and theories of syntax is to figure out how it is that those rules, or really the job for us as speakers of a language, is to know the syntax in order to be able to figure out what people are meaning when they put together certain strings of sound, phonetic forms, the things that people say, or the written forms or whatever, right? We need syntax in order to figure that out. We have to know what the rules and conventions are. So the sentences can be thought of as kinds of things, right? And that's a kind of, we use a kind of metaphor or a metaphorical concept when we look at sentences. We think of them as being objects of something. Sentences are things, and like all things, or most things, they are composed of parts. So that's a basic idea that we have to understand, right? And those parts include words of different kinds, words that belong to different categories. So man is a noun, kiss is a verb, the is a determiner, we call a determiner, right, and so forth. And we have different categories that we put things in based on having done an investigation about how all these things work. So in order to figure out even what the categories of words are, we have to be making the calculation about what the set of rules are, because the categories are, in some sense, determined by the set of rules. So they reflect the rules that go into building the sentences, and they're the matter that the rules are concerned with. They're saying, oh, if you're going to put these two things together, and this is a determiner, then that has to be a noun. So we know that, and how do we know that? If I say the man went to the store, I know that man, in that case, is a noun because why? How do I know that? Because man is always a noun? Give me a case where man isn't a noun. Huh? One person raise your hand and I'll call him. Go ahead. Raise your hand. Someone raise your hand. A case where man is not a... Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of, right? You better man up, right? Where it's a verb, right? Yeah, who knows what that is, right? But you could also say, I want them to man the harpoon. Okay, so I mean that's just the nature of the beast, right? That words in and of themselves, phonetic forms, are not married to particular categories in general. That's the way English works in general. They can shift in between different syntactic categories, and we know if I say the man went to the store, man is a noun because why? Because the needs to have a noun, and there's nothing else there that could go with it to make it okay, right? There's no case where the can exist without, well, no, I won't say no case, sorry. But in general, that's the way it works. So then what we need to do is to pair up what our task is in using language, producing language and understanding it. We need to pair up the form, the phonetic form, with the meaning. That's what we're doing, right? That's the whole process. So notice that syntax then is not concerned with the intricate details of the sounds that are used in language, but it has to be aware of them because the sounds are reflective of certain things like morphological structure, right? But we're also inevitably concerned with meaning, because that's the purpose of syntax, is to make it possible for us to pair this weird stuff, this sounds that come out of our vocal tracts, with concepts that people have, right? That's what language does. So we have a phonetic form. The boy, you could write this in different forms. I'll give it here with the whole sentence has a phonetic form consisting of a string of sounds, and I've added some annotations where there's a plus to show morpheme boundaries, because that would be in some versions of phonology, this would be a representation that you would generate from the rules. You would throw in the boundaries, the word boundaries, the morpheme boundaries, and so forth. So the phonetic form would have all of that. But that's what we're dealing with, is a phonetic form of some kind for that sentence. And we need to then pair that up with meaning. And the meaning here would be complex. I'm going to give this meaning in a way that it can be spelled out following a system of conceptual structure. What is it that people are thinking when they say things? What is that this is? Anna Wierzbicka is based on her theory of how you can spell out the meanings of things. And she does this by using only words that are really simple and basic and that you can't define. Undefinable pieces that you find everywhere in language and that you find, she claims, in every language. There's those same simple pieces. So things like person, more, there is. Her claim is that in some form, that concept, there is, which you can imagine trying to define that. There is means you're lost, right? There's nothing really that you can say, right? And you find that in different forms. In Spanish, it would come as a whole verb, right? A single verb, I. Right? In French, it would come as a little bit even more complex than this, right? Yeah, well, now it's probably just a word, right? But it was it, there, has, right? Would have been the historical origin of that. But that now it's probably just a word, right? So there's more than one person. These people are male and young, where male and young could be defined further, but those would be basic molecular concepts, right? Now it gets complicated because I would say that encoded in the sentence by the is the concept, something like this. There could be other concepts, but one possible interpretation is, I think that you were already thinking about these people. It's a lot of stuff to be throwing in there, right? But there is some meaning to the. We don't just use it randomly. It's giving us information that helps us to understand which boys we're talking about, right? And it has a complicated meaning of that sort. I'm not going to say that you could teach this to people if you were trying to teach people who are learning English from languages that don't have the, this would work, but it's something like that. Put into the Wierzbickian framework. There's a thing. This thing can be alive. So here we're talking about, we've got the boys, the and boys. We need frog. And there's some other stuff in there to make frog, but I can't spell it all out. It would be humongous, presumably. But there's a concept of that thing. And I think that you were not already thinking about this thing before now, right? Because if you were thinking about it, I would say what? You had this in mind. I couldn't use that, right? I would have to use the or something else. This or whatever. Okay, so we have all of that. And then we need the kiss thing, right? So these people did something to this thing before now, because it's past tense, right? When this happened, the lips of these people touched a part of this thing. Is that right? And so forth, right? So what we have in this sentence then is a bunch of grammatical morphemes and a bunch of then more contentful morphemes. If you think about it, what are the things, really all you need to get the basic meaning across is boy, kiss, frog, right? The rest of the stuff is some kind of grammatical glue that we use in order to, and we do it with little pieces that have to be put in the right way. And that's done over and over and over again following the same similar patterns, because they are encoding highly frequent concepts that assist us in interpreting the sentence, but that you wouldn't want to have to spell all this stuff out, right? Every time you wanted to say a boy's kissed a frog, right? And so the things that those basic kinds of concepts before now, I think that you were thinking about these things before or whatever, right? Just use the, because we're for whatever reason we just automatically bring that concept to mind, and the allows us to do that. So that's the basic what the system is, right? We have grammatical morphemes, and then we have so more than one. We have the z on boys, right? We've got past tense with before now, the definite article giving us all of that, and the indefinite article giving us all of that to give us the overall meaning. And then we have on top of that, we have lexical morphemes, what we call lexical morphemes, right? So the grammatical morphemes are things like the endings on verbs, past tense, present participle, past participle, plural, and all of that. And then the lexical morphemes are the ones that have that have rich conceptual content. Frog. I don't know how you would even define it, right? But it would be, this is some kind of thing that is alive. Whatever it does, right? It eats flies. I don't know. What does it do? It's typically green. I don't know. But can't even do it, right? Boy would be definable in terms of really basic concepts, right? That would include the notion of being young and being male. And then kiss is a verb, and the verbs will typically have rich conceptual structure as well, right? So it would be something like this. If we just take kiss out of the, what does it mean all by itself, right? Not in this particular context. You could spell that out in some kind of formula, and verbs would typically have the same kind of formula. Because what we're doing often is talking about actions, things that people do lots of times, right? Or things that animals do, or things that machines do, and often things that people do to other people or to other things. That's the one sort of typical scenario. So there's going to be a formula like X does something to Y, where X and Y can be substituted for by frogs, people, machine, computer, whatever, right? And when this happens, lips could be defined. Lips is not, believe it or not, lips is not a universal concept, at least not in the same way. So it would have to be defined in terms of body parts. But that wouldn't be hard. There are ways of doing that, but to simplify things, we leave that alone. But clearly lips is part of the, as we already noticed, lips and touching. Touching would be a basic concept, right? And part of, and all of that. So we can spell this all out. We have lexical morphemes, and we have the morphosyntax that supplies the grammatical morphemes and the structure that allows us to figure out the relationship between those grammatical morphemes and the overall meaning and the different pieces that we have there. So it's not a trivial thing, right? Meaning, ideas, concepts, understandings that are rich things, and a little code, sounds strung together in a certain fashion. And syntax is one of the things that helps us in being able to have that work. Because it says, oh, if you put these kinds of words next to each other, then you get a certain meaning overall, right? And if you put this grammatical morpheme on the end of a verb, then you get another meaning and so forth. And we just do this all the time and get it all figured out by virtue of the ubiquity of it all, right? The everywhere. I can't remember exactly how many billion pages you can find. Google will find the. Okay. So then the process. Well, actually, let's stop here for a day because we're going to go on a different route now. We're going to sort of now look at what is that system? What is it that? What's the set of rules, right, that allows us to put this all together and to figure out the meanings of them?